Yeah, welcome everyone. As I said earlier, this is a session on burnout. My name is Jonty Rose. I'm a business psychologist. Today I'm joined by Rich. Rich, you want to introduce yourself, mate?
Yeah, thank you, Jonty. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to the discussion today. I'm a senior relationship manager at Thrive, so look after our clients that are using the Thrive mental wellbeing app.
I'm just looking at Michelle's comment. Good morning. I can't hear anything. Is that just me? Is that just Michelle? Can someone else type if you can't hear anything? Okay. Michelle, probably maybe check your volume, maybe restart Zoom, something like that. Give that a go. And good luck with that. Okay, thanks, Rich. So I'm just going to give you a quick summary of what we're going to talk about today. So we're just going to look at burnout. So thinking about what it is and how we might detect it and the cause of burnout. And then we're going to look at burnout and the organization. And then at the end, we're going to look at the importance of switching off and setting boundaries. And then Rich is going to do a bit of a talk about what we've got in terms of the app at Thrive. So hopefully you'll find that informative as well. So I just want to start by giving you a Slido poll. So I just want a bit of feedback from you. And you can access that by using the QR code if you've got a smartphone. If not, and you're on your browser, you can go to slido.com and put in number 2337839. So the question is, I hope that's working. Anyway, the question is, do you think you have ever suffered or come close to suffering burnout? Does that link work, Rich?
Ooh. It does indeed.
Look at that. 80% say yes, 86% say yes. Don't know. Fair enough. Yeah. Let's give you another half a minute. No, yeah. So pretty resounding yes. 88% of you, 24 of you anyway, say that you have got close to suffering burnout. So yeah, I mean, burnout is a very it's becoming more prevalent. Maybe it's being talked about a little bit more, but we know that it is becoming more prevalent, and this could be for a number of reasons. But we know that workplace stress is definitely on the increase. It probably wasn't helped by the pandemic and things like that, but there's also other aspects involved in it. So we talk about burnout, and often I think the thing is someone saying, they don't know or know. Often it's not that clear, perhaps, what it is. So I'm going to give you a bit of a kind of potted history of it and what we understand by it. Burnout syndrome was first used. The term was first used by a German psychologist. His name was Herbert Freudenberger, and back in 1974. But it's probably most famously associated with and has been studied most by a couple of American researchers called Christina Maslach and Susan Jackson, and they kind of really popularized this back in the 70s and 80s. But it was only in 2019 that the term burnout and the condition burnout was actually recognized by the WHO, the World Health Organization, as an occupational phenomenon. And they were the first official body to recognize the phenomenon. So although it's been talked about for years, it's never really been clarified what it is or actually sort of defined as any sort of syndrome or phenomenon. But according to research by Westfield Health back in 2022, close to half, like 46% of UK workers consider themselves close to burnout. And it's not surprising, perhaps, when you hear that in the UK, an estimated 1 in 4 workers take time off for stress every year. And 1/3 of UK employers claim to suffer from physical and mental exhaustion and frequently suffer from that due to pressures within the workplace. So what do we mean by burnout? It's quite a clear definition, actually: a state of emotional and physical and mental exhaustion, and that is a result of chronic stress that's not being properly managed, or the person doesn't have the opportunity to recover from that stress. Now, it's most often considered in the context of work. And there's certainly been an upward trend in the number of people with work-related stress, anxiety, depression in the last few years. And the increase in workplace burnout means that perhaps on the one hand, people have become more aware of mental health and feel a bit more comfortable reporting issues, but it also could indicate that work demands have increased. We know that the world of work has shifted pretty dramatically in the last decade, probably a couple of decades really, with new technologies, and then more recently with flexible working, and then of course like globalization. All of that has kind of forced us to adapt quite quickly, and I think that perhaps our ability to maintain a healthy working relationship with our organizations and our jobs has not really caught up with the kind of changes that have been expected of us. And burnout is commonly portrayed as an adaptation disorder in the media, I would say mainly, but that kind of means that a person is considered to be unable to cope with the stresses that they face. And often it's suggested that maybe it's just a case of a few simple adjustments to our lifestyle, and that will help us recover. Maybe we need to take more breaks, holidays, this sort of thing. But I think it's really important to recognize that burnout really comes about from a combination of personal and organizational and environmental factors. And these need to be addressed as a whole, really, to enable recovery and more importantly, to prevent it from recurring, because people can get away from their work and they can recover, but then they go back into the situation, the same thing happens again. For the purpose of today's session, I'm going to focus on examples that are primarily around workplace burnout, but burnout can also happen outside of the workplace too, such as in parents, parental burnout. We do a session on that, or when your primary role is looking after someone at home. So, but any advice we give out today, Rich and I talk about today, can of course be applied to different situations to address burnout, and so it's all kind of relevant. In terms of occupations that are particularly prone to burnout, care work is usually cited as the most common occurrence of this, but it's common in all sorts of industries, and it doesn't matter kind of genders, demographics, and sort of social status, that sort of thing. It's kind of across the board. You can imagine the example of sort of care work. You can see how pretty immediately how environmental contributors might make us more prone to getting burnout in that sort of environment. It's a highly demanding type of job in terms of sort of mental and often physical resources. It's often populated by individuals who really want to make a difference and help people, and so they tend to, or we, if we work in that industry, tend to bind our own values to success in that role. And the role itself is commonly underappreciated in terms of societal status, and of course the kind of compensations, financial compensations that we're awarded from it. And I think, in the UK at the moment, you can see that all around us with these sort of strikes and that sort of thing, and also during the pandemic as well. Right, I've got another question for you. This is a word cloud, I think. So same format. Just go to that QR code or that URL there. So I just want to really query you, what are the signs and symptoms that you might look out for when it comes to burnout? What do you think you'd be kind of looking at? What do you associate it with? Hopefully you can access that. That one work, Rich? Yeah, cool. Fatigue, being tired, exhaustion, excessive tiredness, silence, bursts of anger, irrational thinking, exhaustion, increased absence, fatigue, tiredness, grumpy. Change in sleeping patterns, tiredness, confusion, frantic behavior, apathy, lovely. Lack of motivation, brilliant. Inability to switch off, isolating, crying, tired, crying, overeating, not eating, feeling sad, tired, hair loss, feeling exhausted, reclusiveness, less chatty. Simple activities become hard. Yeah, working late, overwork, dizziness, wow. Insomnia, brain fog, yeah. Eating but not hunger, alcohol use, yeah, of course. Exhaustion, poor vision. Not feeling myself, irritability, yeah, lovely. Impatience with other people, I guess, yeah. Depression, headaches, lovely. Yeah, all brilliant things. Some of those things I would have to look up. Things like poor vision, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely possible. It has a number of kind of manifestations of how it kind of appears in people, whether physical or psychological. A lot of those ones you've come up with they are very common. That sort of apathy, impatience with other people, very good. That motivation thing that someone's just put at the top there, great. This sort of thing, and sort of detachment from your job and engagement with your job is a real kind of thing. And focus, that concentration thing. Headaches is a very common physical manifestation. That obviously can be other things as well, but poor vision being due to migraines, due to stress. Okay, yeah, I would need to check into that, but yeah, I can totally believe it. Inability to make decisions, yeah, kind of lack of concentration as well, and an impairment of your cognitive processing, I would think, for sure. Okay, thank you for that. So, but interesting, as I said earlier on, it's kind of interesting because, and as I say about the WHO sort of defining this and kind of becoming this sort of condition that's been recognised, it does have to have these sort of three dimensions, if you want, and you can see them there. And it's kind of like these three things are really sort of do make up the sort of the kind of the body of it, which is exhaustion, cynicism, and a sense of inefficacy. So I'll just go through those really. Exhaustion, fairly kind of self-explanatory, but it's a really key component of it, and a few people mentioned it in the word cloud there. And that isn't just a feeling of being tired, like after you've had a bad night's sleep, you've been out late. This is like a chronic and sort of overwhelming experience. You can imagine it as being feeling completely worn out, having very little energy for anything. And with this sort of constant feeling of fatigue, even when you're inactive, even when you're sitting around or you've had a full night's sleep. You kind of get up and you feel completely wasted. Now that is that sort of feeling, and you can imagine how difficult that makes it to achieve anything useful, whether it's in work or outside of work. So that's this kind of like base sort of thing. And then you get this, on top of that, you get this cynicism, what they used to call depersonalization. And it's an attitude that you develop as a result of experiencing long-term effects of exhaustion and chronic stress. And cynicism is particularly, you can imagine it in like care work, in those sort of settings, it can show up as like a really negative or kind of like inappropriate attitude towards your patients, your clients. So as someone said earlier on, this irritability, short temper, loss of that kind of idealism about your job, and basically then withdrawal. And in the wider sort of work setting, it's a kind of general negative attitude towards your work. It can begin to affect the way that we recognize our own failures and our own successes. So successes aren't rewarding anymore, and failures become overemphasized and sort of catastrophized. And this can trap us in a kind of vicious cycle of negativity about our own worth, the meaning and the purpose of what we're doing, and then also the organization that we work for. On top of that, then you get this sense of inefficacy. So reduced self-efficacy, it comes about as a person sort of evaluating their kind of past and present accomplishments negatively, and this results in a diminished sense of incompetence, and also leads to then like lack of productivity and performance. It was originally called reduced personal accomplishment, and it was also described as reduced capability, low morale, someone said motivation, and an inability to cope with your day-to-day tasks. Now, those three dimensions are really common among people who feel burned out, but it's really important to keep in mind that both the person and their social context needs to be taken into consideration. As I said, this is because burnout is typically a result of an imbalance between the work environment and the person, rather than just exclusively down to the individual. So that means that job-related burnout can be quite tricky to diagnose and detect because, we have natural fluctuations in how we're feeling. We're feeling tired and this sort of thing, might be feeling a bit run down. I was saying to Rich earlier on, and that can affect our job performance. It's kind of normal. We kind of fluctuate like this. Because of that, it's really important to keep a kind of open dialogue. If you're in a position of authority in a company or whatever, keep an eye out for it. Keep in mind that even when someone is being quite productive at work, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not starting to feel burned out, or they might be getting close to the edge. It's quite a tricky and sort of nebulous kind of concept, and it can come up quite, it can sort of sit there for quite a while at a low level, and then something can trigger it and really send you over the edge with it. So it's a tricky one. Right, so those three dimensions can sort of manifest in various symptoms. We were talking about when I asked you what you'd be look out for. We came up with some of these as well, and these are physical and psychological. And often physical sensations and symptoms can precede the sort of psychological ones. And that, often we think it's like your body's way of telling you something needs to change. Being aware of these indicators can really help you to identify if you might be becoming affected by stress and do something to make sort of preventative actions, and Rich will talk a bit about that later on. But someone say you might experience regular headaches, stomach and digestive issues, long-term muscle tension, this sort of thing you get in and it might become like a bad back. I mean, it's quite common, this sort of holding this tension in our body. And also sleep issues, it might be too much sleep, it might be too little sleep. Psychologically speaking, burnout might cause us to feel drained of emotion, detached from our surroundings. You also experience feelings of hopelessness, low mood, you might feel demotivated. Guilt is also quite a common feeling, especially when burnout is caused by, if you're caring for someone, either that's professional, perhaps just at home caring, that sort of thing. And that also might lead to you feeling a lack of caring about those around us. And that's known as, you probably heard about this in terms of when we hear about a lot of kind of terrible things in the news, compassion fatigue. If you hear about the war, and you kind of like, after a while, you just get fatigued by it. As I said, these feelings are often quite gradual, so they can be quite hard to spot, especially early on. And any gradual progression of any symptoms, it kind of allows us to normalize them. We get used to how we're feeling like that, and that makes it even harder to notice them until they become overwhelming. I was talking to someone in a session yesterday, and they've been told that these things like description was like as quiet whispers, and these quiet whispers can stay like that for quite a long time until something happens, a bit more major, some sort of minor catastrophe happens that really triggers you, and our body starts to shout about it, and that's when you kind of like you're in full-blown burnout. It's quite difficult to respond to that. Really important though to remember that burnout affects people in different ways, and as I said before, it's really it is influenced by both our individual kind of coping strategies and also our contextual sort of environmental factors as well. So let's have a look at what the causes of burnout are. And you can see on the diagram there, and that is a diagram, a representational diagram of what is known as the job demands resources model of job strain. It's a widely researched theory. It suggests that how stressed a person might get from a particular job is down to an imbalance or balance of our job demands and the resources that are available to us. So examples of demands, job demands, are things like high workload, poor physical environment, bad ergonomics, lighting, air, that sort of thing, irregular working hours, job insecurity, isolation, lack of role clarity, lack of recovery opportunities, lack of recognition and support, lack of autonomy in decision making, that sort of stuff. So those are kind of job demands. Examples of job resources are things like appropriate salary, reasonable working hours, opportunities to take breaks, career development opportunities, training and development, that sort of thing, positive team climate. So do you get on with people you work with? Do you think your work is meaningful? Do you have variety in the tasks that you do? Do you have ability to make decisions about how you do your job? You're the person that's doing it. Do you choose how to do it? And really, really important, manager, team, customer, project feedback. Do you get like constructive feedback from the people around you, from your superiors, from your customers maybe, or just from the job you're doing? You get to see it finished and sort of completed. So demands and resources, they work at different levels or dimensions. Some are kind of organizational, some are interpersonal between people, and some are intrapersonal. So that's things that we have inside of us. And the model suggests that jobs with chronic high demands and low resources will lead to chronic exhaustion, and chronic exhaustion really is another term for burnout. And you see that in the bottom right quadrant of that drawing. So jobs with high resources and are moderate to high demands actually motivate us and can lead us to be really engaged with our work and to actually perform really well. So that's the kind of model as it is. But if it was just a case of balancing these things up, once we go to work, you start to have these demands, you have these resources, it would probably be quite a straightforward thing to do, as managers, organizations. But people are quite different in what they find demanding, and this could alter from day to day, project to project, and they're also quite different in what resources they need, what is appropriate for them, what kind of training do they want, what support do they want, what does autonomy look like for them, what does task variety look like for them. And these things are always in flux. Situations change, organizations change, you get mergers, you get takeovers, you get departments being moved, projects, direction of the business, this sort of thing. And because people don't always take proactive steps and they miss the signs, this is when things start to go wrong. And how does burnout progress? Well, it's got a pretty set sort of 3 stages, which are basically you get your job stressors. So this is an imbalance between your work demands and your individual resources. This leads to individual strain. which is an emotional response of kind of exhaustion and anxiety. And lastly, you get this defensive coping mechanism. So this is the change in your attitude and your behavior, like greater cynicism towards your work and a reduction in engagement, a detachment from it. If you have all three of those, that is what you'd be defined as being burnt out. So if you went and saw someone, that was what they would be looking for. So that's kind of what the causes are in a kind of a simpler way. I mean, it's like this is a very widely researched theory of burnout, and it's one of the most kind of used in the sort of psychological literature. So the next thing we want to talk about is burnout in the organization. We often tend to ignore some of the major factors involved in burnout. Often, and I speak from experience of organizational work, often the attitude is to kind of try and get the individual to do something about it and put the sort of responsibility onto the individual. But, if we are serious about tackling burnout, we really need organizations to be quite proactive about this. How are they going to approach this in a way that's going to be useful for people as well? Now, I mentioned her earlier on, but Christina Maslach, the kind of, I'd say she was anyway, the foremost authority on burnout. She points to a Gallup survey of 7,500 employees. And this is where these top 5 organizational factors come from, and you can see them on the slide there. And she also gives us a really nice metaphor, I think, that helps us to understand perhaps how we should approach the role of the organization. And I think that, as I said, this is kind of overlooked in this sort of whole story. And she says, like, picture a canary in a coal mine. And I hope we all understand this sort of thing. Canaries used to be used, and they don't use them anymore, so it's probably too cruel. But and obviously they've probably got better methods of doing it. But canaries used to be used to you take them into a coal mine to check whether there was poisonous gases being released. Because of the canary was much smaller and it was quite sing, and it was quite an active bird. It would be quite a good detection method of knowing whether the poisonous gases, because the birds would be affected early on. They're small and whatever. So, they react, and it gives a chance to mine. The miners are going away at something, and this bird starts goes very quiet, then they get a chance and they get out pretty quickly. So you think about this bird, it starts off as a healthy sort of healthy little thing. It's tweeting away, flapping its wings, it's singing as it's taken down into the darkness of the mine shaft. And then sometimes later, it reacts. It's kind of like it says, so we bring it out, they bring the bird out, and its feathers, they're covered in soot, and poor thing's been half poisoned. But it's done its job, right? It's great. We've saved the miners, and it's but it's no longer singing, and it's in a pretty serious condition. It kind of needs veterinary care to recover. But Maslach says, what in that situation will we do? Will you start looking at the situation and thinking, okay, why has the canary made itself sick? It's like, that's not what we treat that like. We basically think, nah, this is stupid, right? What we're going to do is we're going to ask the question, what's making it sick? It's the coal mine. The coal mine's making it sick. It's leaking methane gas, and it's unsafe to work in there. And it's this sort of environmental circumstances that is often the part that's overlooked when it comes to the workplace and its effect on people. And yes, we can say we can make people take more breaks, we can make them do certain things, but ultimately, if that environment doesn't support their ability to do that, then you're going to have a problem. And you can, as I said, you can take people out of that situation temporarily. Maybe someone takes a break for weeks on end, whatever. They come back and their workplace is exactly the same, their responsibilities exactly the same, their demands are the same. Then they're going to burn out. You've not solved the problem at all. It doesn't matter how much meditation they do. It's like this is an issue. So there's real costs involved in this as well. If you ignore burnout in terms of the organization, there's some research done in high pressure firms. I think this is US research. In high pressure firms, healthcare costs are supposed to be 50% greater than organizations that are not considered to be high pressure by their employees. Workplace stress is estimated to cost the US economy $500 billion a year. And each year, 550 million work days are lost due to stress on the job. So it's some pretty staggering statistics. Another study by the APA, the American Psychological Association, claims that burnt out employees are 2.5 times as likely to be actively seeking a different job. And we know that's very expensive for companies. they're 63% more likely to take a sick day, and 23% more likely to visit the emergency room. So obviously in America, this is, it's very visceral, that sort of cost, because, we know about medical insurance and this sort of thing. But it just goes to show the bottom line costs of this are real, and when it comes to trying to improve wellbeing companies, reduce the cause of burnout, it's really crucial that we kind of take all these things into consideration. There is a bottom line to this. So what can we do if we are sort of organizational leaders or managers, this sort of thing? I tend to kind of look at this as a really a kind of process of trying to ask better questions. People tend to be, the workers that are on the front line tend to know more about the company and how it operates and what's needed and what will work than the people at the top. And it's easier to assume that they know best because they're in positions of authority, but often they are kind of removed from what's going on day to day. So realistically, it's time to get down and speak to people on the shop floor, so to speak, about what's going on and what would be a way of improving it. So when we're thinking about that JDR, that job demands resources model, you need to get into this habit of like constantly asking about and identifying the sort of demands of what the job is. These, as I said, these are going to ebb and flow, and you need to find them out at all sorts of different levels. So you need to go and look at them at the organizational level. So this could be, strategic level. Where's the business going? What are the directions, in terms of mergers, in terms of like, the markets that they're operating in, the external environment they're working in. But you also need to look at it down on the departmental level, down on the team level, and really crucially, down on the individual level. This attitude, this isn't a one size fits all. So it's like you need to kind of look at this and bear in mind that this will change. Look at it on all these different levels and think, this is going to change. It's a constant process of assessing this. And once you've identified those demands, work out the resources in exactly the same way. So you look at all sorts of levels. What are they like at the organizational level? Where can you get investment from? Where can you get kind of like where can you get staffing from for department levels? What is available, what is appropriate, and perhaps what kind of quick wins might you be able to harness? As I said earlier, this is always has to be seen as a kind of moving feast, and it really is the organizations that are able to do this in a kind of like agile and sort of like iterative way that are going to be the ones that are most able to deal effectively with these issues before they get out of hand and you start getting serious absences, presenteeism, people turning up for work when they shouldn't do, people leaving their jobs, that sort of thing. So it's kind of like a whole sort of process of assessing these demands, providing these resources, and getting that thing sort of looked at and assessed on a constant level. Never think you've got this situation covered. It's going to change. We know that things change all the time, and it's a tricky way to work. But I think that companies do this a lot with their product development. But, we need to look at this in a sort of like an HR sort of people way as well. In the same sort of process, always looking at what opportunities are available, what stresses are put on the situation, what demands are being made.
Just reflecting on that, Jonty, and to give you a chance to have a glass of water and probably a breath. When I think it was Kirsty in the chat put kind of agreed with you that there might not be any prominent visible signs from the employee that they're really struggling, and they might be, for all intents and purposes, performing. I guess quite a tricky dynamic as a manager sometimes to see some of these signs. So I guess rather than a question, just a reflection that, what responsibility might there be on the individual? I know you mentioned that it shouldn't be all on the individual to say how they are feeling, but it can be quite a tricky dynamic to address when visibly, particularly if people are the types of people very conscientious and want to do a good job, and they say yes and they don't put their own mask on first, and they look out for others, and they're like, right, yeah, I'm up to it. But that's a very fine line between being up to it and saying everything's good and I've got this, and the other side of that.
I mean, on the most I suppose the most basic level, but it's not basic, it's complicated, isn't it? But it's the crucial thing is that we've all if you're high up in an organization, there's this attitude that we always need to have the answers to everything, right? That's the kind of thing. We're the people that know what's going on. We always got an answer for everything. There's no sort of vulnerability. There's never a time when I don't know what's going on. There's never a time I need to ask someone else something, or I need to show any sort of like weakness, for want of a better word. So what I would say in terms of like bringing these conversations out, I would say that as leaders, as managers, but as anyone, it's all our responsibility. Model that vulnerability, model that kind of like, not in a sort of like, I don't mean that in like a needy way, like always sort of saying, please help me, but admit when you don't know what's going on. Ask people questions, genuinely ask people questions, be curious, say, how does this work for you? Is this working well for you? Is there a better way of this working from your point of view? As I said, that often the thing is, what the people that aren't asked are the people that actually are doing the work. It tends to be kind of this assumption that people higher up will, information will filter up to them. That often just doesn't happen unless you really go down digging and looking for it. You don't find it out, because people don't want to reveal that maybe something went wrong with a project or and there's a really interesting book, actually. I don't know if anyone's read it. Is it Matthew Side, that Black Box Thinking, Rich, which is a really interesting a view of why the airline industry, it's called black box thinking because the airline industry is probably unique in the way that it tries to understand when things have gone wrong. It really analyzes things in such detail. Many organizations and businesses don't do this. They tend to cover things up, but the airline industry, as we know, is incredibly safe, considering what it's actually doing, putting people up in metal boxes in the air. It's because they kind of try and find out what's gone wrong. So yeah, it's all about information, Rich, as far as I can tell, and that psychological safety. Kirsty, that vulnerability is what. If Kirsty shares something to me that's basically a sign of her vulnerability, I'm going to trust her to basically keep something I tell her more confidential and just treat it with respect, because she's expecting that from me. We are a social species. That's how we tend to operate.
There's one comment, Jonty, I think, which is asking where the sort of origin of these 5 organizational factors.
That's a Gallup poll. I can I'd have to kind of dig it out from my notes, but it's a Gallup poll. I think it's 7,500 employees in US organizations. I don't know what industries they're in.
Okay. Thank you.
Dig those ones out. Black box thinking. Yeah, it's really it's fascinating. But one of the really interesting things about it, though, is one of the industries that doesn't do this, which is alarming, is the medical industry. So they don't. You think that would be one where, so literally people dying on surgeons' tables, and like you think that would be completely analysed, but actually what happens is information's covered up because they don't want to know that they don't. Surgeons, whatever. There's just a culture of kind of concealing this stuff. It's terrifying, right? Yes. What's that? I run regular film. Yeah. It's 100%. I mean, also, this is kind of. I mean, I know we're going off the topic, but this is all about this. Like any sort of organizational work is about kind of information and this sort of honest feedback. And feedback, when I said about feedback earlier on as well, it's feedback both ways. It's not just my manager giving me feedback. It's that feedback to the manager that this isn't working or whatever, So it's really important. This compartmentalizing. We try and keep it personal. Yeah. But also, they've spent years learning to be surgeons. It's that I could go in. If you got me and Rich, said, oh, like. I don't know, can you come and paint my house? And I mess it up. I've got nothing to lose by saying, Rich, I've messed it up in the top right corner there. You know what I mean? But if I'm like a real professional, I'm kind of wearing my white jacket, I've got my 15 PhDs. It's like there's a lot more personally to lose about that. It's there's definitely a status angle to it. Cool. Right, let's just have a look at these just individual things just before we'll have some more questions in a bit, so we've got a bit of time. Yeah, so whilst although, you know, as I say, I'm a kind of big believer in organizational responsibility for this stuff, because you know, I come across this sort of idea a lot, that it's often like, can you do us a session on you know, teaching people to be resilient or something like that. So I do kind of you know, I do put a lot of this on the organization, but there is stuff that we can do as well, and Rich will talk about the use of the app as far as it's concerned as well in a bit. But there are things we can do, and there's definitely some quite weird things. You know, there's a study, like I think a Viva study, which says that about 70% of people check their emails outside of working hours. And this kind of amounts to something like 16 days a year that you are working outside your usual hours, and you know, you're not being paid for it. Now, I get this thing of like, okay, you know, it's good to be, you know, responsible for your work and whatever, but you know, at the end of the day, this is a contract. So I think it's more about attitudes towards work. And many people don't feel rested when they come back from holidays, this sort of stuff. You know, and really what this comes down to, what I've put it in here, is like switching off. And setting boundaries between what our personal life, and someone saying there about compartmentalizing, but yeah, being able to switch off from work and our sort of personal lives, and you know, lives outside of family life or whatever. Switching off, I think, is really about being able to shift the focus of our attention onto something, you know, away from whatever it is that's causing our worry. It's not only just about work, it's about boundaries, boundaries with relationships as well. So it's being able to switch your attention from what is causing that stress over to something that perhaps is something that we value, perhaps more. Ability to sort of switch on to who or what we find interesting, meaningful in life. Maybe it, you know, we turn away from our work and we look at our kids. I've got kids, you know, that sort of stuff, or your friends. You know, many of us don't spend enough time, I think, socializing, you know, healthy socializing with friends, or perhaps like hobbies, something like that, to take part in, that we actually get a lot of pleasure out of. But I do think that, like, switching off from your job, it's not just about doing that at the end of the day. It's about being able to set boundaries within our working day. That's equally as important. There's a lot of evidence to say that, you know, this is what this sort of like trying to balance throughout the day is what matters. It's kind of like you know, it's sort of more living on that sort of level, which is like you know, every day we're kind of little bits of de-stressing, not this kind of like expectation at the end of the day, you know, we just crash out in front of the TV. So, you know, things like taking regular breaks, making sure you get up from your desk and properly get away from your screen. Try to have a proper lunch hour. I know, Rich, you try to do that. Rich likes cooking, but I know, but you know, Rich, is a good thing. You know, you actually get away from your desk, if you know, when you get the opportunity. This can kind of seem quite out of step with sort of contemporary office life. You know, we often caught between, like, you know, meeting, barely getting breaks to even go to the loo, maybe that sort of stuff. I know one of our clients, you know, I mean, some people really don't have any breaks in their day, and this is kind of dependent on office culture. But the thing is that, you know, there is a lot of evidence about this. It's like it's much more effective at reducing stress than trying to have you know, maybe even like long weekends or holidays. My old professor did a lot of research into the effects of holidays on recovery, you know, our ability to recover, and quite horrifying really. But he said he found that even taking like a 2-week holiday, the beneficial effects of that, I mean, self-reported, so you've got to be a little bit take it a little bit of a pinch of salt, self-reported, that, you know, a week later, yes, everyone's feeling like they've been restored and whatever. 2 weeks, let's say 3 weeks, even after a 2-week holiday, 3 weeks later, there's no noticeable benefit to it. And I don't mean that like don't take holidays, but it just shows you that we often kind of build this thing. We live this stressful life. We're never stopping, never taking breaks. And then we think, well, yeah, okay, but I've got a holiday coming up. And I know friends of mine, they talk about this. They're waiting for the holidays all the time. It's actually much more important to try and bring this into your day-to-day life. And also, like, proper recovery as well. It really requires like a change of how you use your mind, how you use your brain, so your cognitive processing. Really important to do something very different from what your daily work is. I often work in front of a computer screen, as Rich does, but, you know, in those sort of situations, you need to do something completely different. So commonly, what, you know, things you might think of, like you might think, I'll finish work and I'll I don't know, watch a Netflix series or something like that. Problem is with that, the actual processing of what your brain's doing is really similar. So, I mean, yeah, okay, you're not working on a spreadsheet maybe, but you're actually, the way your brain's being used is the same. So what you need to do is do something completely different. So if you work on a screen, a great thing for me to do would be to go for a walk, or perhaps to, if I fancy doing it, if I was a painter, I'd do some painting. If I was if I'd, pottery, one thing like pottery, do that. Gardening, something like cooking is a really good one, Rich. Rich boxing, I know. Things like that, that it's not about this sort of just sitting down and just like lunching out. It's about basically like doing something active maybe, but just changing the cognitive processing. If your day-to-day work is a very manual work, then by all means watch a Netflix series, go to the cinema, something like that, no problem. But just trying to figure out what you can do that's a real change in it. That kind of gives you that boundary definition. So when you're trying to stick to boundaries, really important to try and be consistent and be transparent with ourselves and with other people about where we draw the line. Really important to communicate clearly what is and isn't acceptable to us, perhaps in terms of, like we're talking about work, the hours we work, what overtime we're willing to do, making sure that we take allotted holidays, be really consistent about that. You need to try and make any of these sort of things part of your set routine. And it helps you to kind of habitualize healthy behaviors and provide sort of clarity to others and to ourselves about what's expected. The problem is, many of us are kind of too flexible with boundaries. We feel like we push at them ourselves, and then we allow other people to push at them. It's really important, if you're trying to do that, to kind of set them firmly, be calm about it, but stick to them. And if you're asked to bend them, stick to them. It's not about, that's not being rude. It's actually kind of helpful to other people and give them clarity. And I think that people tend to respect that more as well. I think when it comes to, I think many of us are, well, Rich, often we're working from home. I know a lot of people doing that, are hybrid working. I think that's made it even more difficult probably to stick to boundaries. And talking about earlier on the change in the sort of work environment. It's difficult to create a space between your sort of working day and the rest of your life, because many of us, I don't work in my bedroom, but often you work in the same space. It's important to get out of that situation. Make some sort of I don't know, like a ritual or a habit or something that tells your mind that you finished work. So it might just be a case of like locking your laptop away, putting your work phone on silent, get rid of the paperwork, close the door, that sort of thing. But additionally, try and be proactive with your health. Maybe go for a walk around the block or something like that. Maybe, it's a good way to kind of create this different perspective, shift this sort of thing, like there when I was in work, now I'm doing something else. If you're in an activity, it can be like really dominating. It dominates your processing, your thoughts and all this sort of stuff. But actually your brain's quite good at moving on to something else. So if you can get yourself out of that physical environment, even for quite a brief period of time, it gives you that opportunity. So another way of doing this, which I'm a big fan of, is kind of like trying to focus just for a short amount of time on what's going on right here and now. It can give you a bit of a breathing space between like one activity like work or whatever and a new one, say having a conversation with your kids or sitting down to dinner or something like that. What I mean by that is really mindfulness. I think there's a misconception that mindfulness is about sitting down and sort of doing some sort of formalized meditation in the quiet. That is an entryway into it, of course, but really what it's about is just paying attention to the present moment, non-judgmentally. So just trying to directly experience, just for a moment or two, what's going on and what is actually happening, what's showing up at that time. And you can do that in any activity. So I would try to do something like try and combine mindfulness with some sort of switching off activity. Maybe do something that you do regularly at the end of the day and bring mindfulness to that activity. It could be like just walking between your office and work. So your office and the train station, or maybe the car park if you drive. Maybe it's a tube ride home, bus ride, something like that. It could be something, if you do work from home, maybe just like taking a shower, something like that, making yourself a cup of tea, cooking the evening meal, even doing the washing up, anything like that. Just bring like mindfulness into that process, into that activity. Just notice exactly what's going on, the experience you're doing. Actually try and experience what it is, through all your senses. So noticing the sort of smells, noticing the sort of sensations, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're touching, that sort of stuff. Just trying to connect with the experience on the physical level, You're not trying to make it anything different than it is. Just to kind of bring yourself right into the present moment. Obviously, I've done that for quite a few years. I've kind of got very practiced at it. And Rich will talk about this a little bit about the app in a bit. But like any sort of practice, any sort of change of habit, any change of activity, it takes sort of repeated doing it. But there's been a lot of evidence that this can really help you to sort of set boundaries and really kind of switch off from what you're doing. And what you're really talking about here is basically bringing things out of the sort of mind, the sort of thinking mind, into kind of a full sensory experience of what you're going through now. Rich will talk a bit about what's available in the app for that, but if there's one thing as I say, I don't want to put this back on the individual. I know it sounds like I'm doing that, but if you do get an opportunity to if there's anything you take from this, any habits you take from this, I do think mindfulness is one of the big things that is really worth getting into. And I think that if you do try it, you try it consistently, even like 5 minutes a day for a few weeks, you will really notice a difference, and hopefully that will encourage you to try a bit more. So I think just a quick recap, Rich, and then you can kind of go on what the app has to offer.
No worries.
So, as you said, burnout's a condition. It's characterized by feelings of exhaustion. So, chronic exhaustion, not just feeling a little bit tired. Cynicism about your work, your organization, basically losing meaning in things, and that reduced sense of self-efficacy. So you end up feeling like, you're no good at this stuff anymore. So that's obviously that combination of those things sort of really fall on each other and kind of reinforce each other. Generally is considered to be a response to an imbalance in the demands of your work and the raw resources that you might have available to you. And as I said, when we look at that, it's not, we think about resources, often we think about resource in organizations as being things like, is there enough people on the job? But there's also these kind of really more nuanced things about like feedback and about sort of recognition and about autonomy, things like that. So it's kind of complicated in some ways. As I said, the solutions lie with both individuals. You can take certain responsibility, you can try and set your boundaries, you can definitely incorporate healthy habits that many of us, myself included, don't do enough of. But ultimately it's a combination between that individual change and organizational change. And I think that the one thing that really got me into doing organizational psychology was basically that it was one of the forms of psychology that we could really change people's environment. We could look at environments and actually influence what someone's experiences were based on the context they were living in. Many other types of psychology, clinical and whatever, people come with issues, but there's not a lot you can do with their environment. Organizational psychology is about changing people's environments in the workplace. And so, as organizations, as workplaces, this is what we need to do. This is how we can really impact people's well-being. So, Rich.
Cheers, Jonty. Definitely learned some new things, having done this a couple of times already, and some good engagement in the chat. Definitely this idea of a holly hour. Don't know if you're familiar with that. I like that one. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the app. So for those of you who are less familiar with Thrive Mental Wellbeing, our organization, our background, and we are a healthcare company that uses technology to deliver support to people, so supporting people's mental health. So our co-founders are both practicing clinicians, and the idea of creating the organization and the app in turn was to be able to scale up the support that we could provide to people to get on top of these challenges early. And we talked about the importance of that in the context of burnout. But to provide people with awareness of their mental health and tools to self-manage, and where those presentations of mental health conditions were not on the kind of more mild end of things, say mild anxiety, that some of those symptoms could be self-managed, then we refer people to further support, whether that's through our app itself. So we have a team of therapists at Thrive that sort of deliver the chat function through our therapy in the app, or whether that's referring people onto EAP support through their organization, or indeed, if they need to escalate that case, that individual, get them to see their doctor. So it was about creating a service that use technology to reach more people to help with their mental health. So that's a little bit about Thrive and the app. I'm going to talk you through some of the techniques that exist within the app. And in terms of access, for anyone who isn't joining on behalf of an organization, we provide this not just to corporates, but predominantly working with organizations, within insurance partners, charities, NHS, and it's provided by the organization. You have an access code, you sign up with an email address, you put your access code in, and that gives you access to the app. But the idea was to make the cost to the end user, you or I working within an organization, free at the point of access, to remove some of those barriers of access. So there's a whole host of techniques within the app itself, and it's there for you to sort of explore, if you do have access to the app, what techniques work for you. But we do have within the app 2 screening assessments, which are essentially a series of questions. They're called the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7. They're clinically validated screening scales, which screen for the presence of anxiety and depression. The idea with that being is we have a confidential way to screen, to see how we're feeling on a daily basis, and to get on top of the challenge early. So depending on how you go through that screening assessment will depend what you see in the form of goals. Goals are essentially the sessions that you see in front of you there on the screen. And it might be that if you screen for moderate to severe anxiety or depression, that is when one of our therapists will proactively get in touch with you as an individual within 10 minutes. And there's a huge amount of research and importance about proactively reaching out to people, because a lot of the time people don't reach out even when they are dealing with these mental health conditions. So if you can flip on to the next one, please, Jonty. So there's just a short video. I'm going to highlight a couple of the techniques in the app that may be helpful to help manage stress, build some resilience. So for me, calm breathing and deep muscle relaxation, which we'll talk about in a second, are the most effective techniques that help for me. A lot of evidence behind this technique is diaphragmatic breathing, so belly breathing. We're really seeing the belly rise when we breathe. You breathe in for 3 seconds, you hold that breath and you exhale. You repeat this process, and it can have a really powerful effect just to focus your mind's attention away from those kind of worrying thoughts that we tend to engage in, those what ifs, what might happen, those future events that might unfold on the horizon, and focus our attention on our breathing. You're actually engaging the parasympathetic nervous system as sort of a calming effect to that fight or flight response that's triggered when we're stressed. So a really nice exercise, easy to learn. And once you've mastered it through your app, you can kind of use it as and when you want, if you don't want to use the tech to do that. Deep muscle relaxation then is a process of tensing and relaxing muscle groups within the body. Have a powerful effect actually in calming the body, relieving that tension that tends to manifest itself in a physical way when we're anxious, when we're feeling stressed, and in turn calming the mind. Also beneficial to aid with sleep. So if you're struggling to sleep, you've got things on your mind, brings your focus, your mind's attention to the body, releases that tension. You get this kind of pleasant heaviness as a result. Again, this is just some of the meditation and mindfulness exercises that exist within the app. Go and have an explore, but really the basic premise that holds these things together is you're focusing your attention on the present moment, whether it's the breath, whether it's your external surroundings. Bringing yourself and forcing yourself to be present in that moment can have a really powerful effect in calming the mind. Lots of different variations of meditations, and there's loads of apps out there that just focus on meditation in itself. But really what we're saying within the app itself, within the Thrive app, is these all come from a strong evidence base. We've followed the evidence of what worked. Originally, it was what had been successfully converted into, traditional forms of therapy that have been successfully converted into software. And then we put them into the app to provide to users so that they can help self-manage problems, but also importantly, reach out for support or be proactively contacted by one of our therapists, where you have the therapy as part of the package that we have with you as an organization. Because there's so many people that do sit on those issues that maybe a mild presentation then become more severe and complex, and the situation progresses and it becomes harder to manage. More impact for the individual and also more impact for the organization at large. But encourage you, I think on the next slide, Jonty, there may be
that one.
Yeah, that's the one. So there's a QR code. So this is people for individuals where your organization has got access to Thrive. If you haven't, you can also, you like what you've heard today, you can scan that QR code and it's a means to get in touch. But big advocate for the techniques that sit within the app. I understood, definitely several of these techniques before, including CBT, before coming to Thrive, and before realizing that there's a method of getting these techniques to you via technology. So some really good techniques in there to help self-manage, but also a very big advocate for other things outside of the app that can help to just improve your sort of day-to-day, ride out the lumps and bumps that the day can throw at us, whatever that is for you, that something that you enjoy, preferably to help you manage your well-being and your health. And Jonty's made me feel guilty because he went for a run this morning. I haven't done anything yet, but perhaps later on this evening. But yeah, thank you. I hope that's a bit of an insight into the app if you hadn't experienced it or weren't familiar with it.
Brilliant, Rich. So any other questions? I've seen some. I like this Holly Hour thing, Devin. Very interesting. I'm just looking at Michelle's. Sometimes it's more stressful not being there. That's a classic. I mean, I've known lots of people work for themselves, and basically you can't go on holiday is actually it was very stressful. So what they would do is not turn their phone off and not turn their emails off, because it was more stressful to have that kind of break and then come back to it, which I mean, I totally understand that, but obviously that's not great, obviously. Thanks, Paris. Can we get a copy of the slides? Do we do that, Rich? I don't know. It's a recording, isn't it? I don't know if there's
we normally send the recording round to all attendees, so you get a link which links into our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So that will have everything there. There was asked to a link. I don't know if my messages are actually coming through to the all attendees or just as hosts. So if not, someone asked for the URL, or not the URL, the source of those 5 areas, and I've pinged a link.
Let's just go into the panelists, isn't it? So look.
Yeah, I don't know why that is, but I have got the link to it for whoever.
That's to everyone.
There we go.
Yeah, so the recording will be sent out, Dawn. That's fine.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for no worries, Julian. Thanks everyone for interesting, all your comments as well. There's some interesting stuff. I'm just looking through it. Holly Hour's great. I've never heard of that. That's brilliant. Yeah, Emma, you don't have to do exercise. Knitting works really well. Anything like that. Yeah, complete change of processing. That's why I think that's why those those sort of adult drawing books became so popular, because just doing that in itself is a really great. It seems like a small thing actually, but it's often it has a big impact on people. Cooking's a classic though, Rich.
Yeah.
Many people think it's stressful, but I mean, I love cooking. I know you do, and it's like complete detachment from a computer. Right?
Partner likes jigsaw puzzles. It's done about 4 or 5 in the last week, but.
Looking through the comments. Bring your whole self to work. Yeah. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, one about the dogs there. Definitely agree with that one.
Yeah, great,
cool.
Thanks everyone. What's that? That's the thing, isn't it? We all find our own things to help. Yeah, exactly, Catherine. As long as you do though, Catherine, I think the issue with this stuff is, I do a lot of training with people. It's that thing of noticing that things are getting out of balance though. I think that's often the problem. And I don't know, we don't know who, whether the people we work with live on their own or with their families or whatever else, but that's when you can sort of miss some of these signs that I think that can be a bit problematic. Yeah. How would you deal with burnout based from home struggles and deal with it in workplace? Difficulty with Georgia, just a real quick one about parental. I'm going to go into it now, but the big difference between parental burnout and workplace burnout, obviously you can just go, you know what, this work is not for me, I can leave, but you can't when you're a parent. And this is why it becomes more of a difficult thing to deal with. The main thing to do, as Rich pointed out there, is to seek support, not necessarily professional support, but groups. group stuff. If it was parental stuff or care work, home care or whatever, try and find people that you can speak to in your community that are doing the same thing. It's all about like being able to share experiences, because often we feel isolated. We feel like we're the only people that can do anything about it, which is obviously makes things worse. So yeah. Cool.
Right.
I think that's us, Rich, right? Katie. Yeah. Yeah, it's very full on, Katie, and I think this thing about only being recognised, recognised by organisation in 2019 is just staggering, really, because we've known about this for it's coming on 50 years now. So yeah, it's quite amazing, really. Good luck with that.
Right.
No worries, everyone. Shall I finish this on?
Yeah, let's close up. Thank you everyone for the comments and all the questions. Really good session, and hope you have a good afternoon.